Let's get started with our first news. Alex Pereira's career inside the UFC has been nothing short of spectacular. The Brazilian striker entered the promotion with a reputation as a two-division kickboxing champion and wasted no time in making his presence felt. With his devastating knockout power, particularly that thunderous left hook that defined his run in glory kickboxing, Pereira stormed through the competition. He shocked the world by capturing not just the middleweight title but also the light heavyweight belt, achieving this historic feat in record time. Fans were drawn to his raw power and finishing ability, and the UFC quickly pushed him to the forefront as one of its biggest stars. Pereira headlined major events, drew massive crowds, and established himself as a truly must-watch fighter. But in this unforgiving sport, every champion eventually faces adversity. For Pereira, that moment came against Magomed Ankalaev earlier this year at UFC 313. In a fight many expected him to dominate, Ankalaev flipped the script. Using relentless forward pressure, superior clinch control, and smart tactical adjustments, the Dagestani fighter completely neutralized Pereira's striking. The result was a unanimous decision win for Ankalaev, marking Pereira's first defeat since moving up to light heavyweight. It wasn't just the loss itself that shocked fans, but the way it unfolded. Pereira looked uncomfortable, unable to unleash the kind of offense that usually puts his opponents away. For the first time in his UFC career, the aura of invincibility surrounding him appeared to crack. That defeat immediately raised serious questions about Pereira's ability to adapt when opponents refused to play into his striking-heavy style. Was his rise too quick? Could he evolve his grappling and defensive game to compete with fighters who thrive in areas beyond pure striking? These doubts created even more intrigue as the UFC wasted no time booking an immediate rematch. Now, with UFC 320 fast approaching, Pereira once again stands across the cage from Ankalaev, and the stakes could not be higher. If Pereira finds a way to reclaim the belt, his star power skyrockets to even greater heights. It would show resilience, the ability to adjust, and the mentality of a true champion. A win would keep him firmly planted as one of the most dangerous men in the light heavyweight division, while also opening doors for potential super fights against big names from other weight classes. But if he loses again, the narrative changes drastically. Back-to-back defeats to Ankalaev would force Pereira to make some tough decisions about his career path. A second loss could mean stepping away from the title picture for the foreseeable future, possibly even considering a move back down to middleweight if his body allows it. Another option might be to take a step back, face contenders just outside the top of the rankings, and rebuild momentum before making another run. For a fighter who rose so quickly, such a setback would test his patience and determination like never before. Either way, UFC 320 represents a turning point in Pereira's remarkable journey. The outcome will decide whether he continues to build his legacy as a dominant two-division force, or if he must regroup and find a new path forward. Before moving to the next news, we have one quick request for you. We're constantly working on improving our content to earn your love and support. That's why we truly appreciate it if you could take just a moment to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Move on to another news. Aljamain Sterling recently opened up about one of the most talked about topics in his career, the idea of fighting his close friend and longtime training partner, Merab. For years, fans and analysts have speculated about what it would take for these two bantamweight contenders to ever step inside the octagon against one another. Sterling made it very clear that it's not something he wants and not something he sees happening unless the UFC puts something truly massive on the table. According to Sterling, the UFC has never paid bantamweights the type of money that would even make the idea worth considering. When people throw out figures like $1 million, Sterling laughs it off, saying that kind of money disappears quickly and is not worth destroying a bond built over years of training, sweat, and sacrifice. He emphasized that no normal fight purse, no regular paycheck, and no amount the UFC has currently offered their division could make him betray the trust and friendship he shares with Merab. For Sterling, their connection is deeper than just teammates, it's family. He explained that if the UFC ever came forward with life-changing money, something in the range of $5 to $10 million, then maybe, just maybe, the conversation could begin. Not that it would automatically happen, but it would at least be something worth discussing. That's the level of financial security Sterling believes would justify even entertaining such an idea. Otherwise, he insists there is absolutely no legitimate reason to tarnish his friendship with Merab. Sterling even quoted Bisping, who once said, "Friends make each other rich." That line stuck with him because, in his mind, he and Merab are already making each other better every single day in the gym. They push each other, they test one another, and they've fought countless battles behind closed doors without cameras, without fans, and without paychecks. In that sense, Sterling believes the work they've done together has already created value far beyond a fight purse. But what makes fighting different, Sterling explained, is that it's not like any other sport. You're not passing a ball, you're not running a race. Fighting means physically hurting someone, aiming to elbow them in the face, to kick them, to choke them, to inflict real damage. That's not something Sterling could see himself doing to Merab unless the stakes were so astronomical that it would change both of their lives forever. To put it in perspective, he compared it to hitting your own father in the face just for money. The thought of that is so outrageous, so uncomfortable, that it paints a picture of why fighting a friend or family member doesn't sit right with him. Sterling also pushed back at people who say they'd fight their family members for free, or who joke about taking on their grandmother for a few $1,000s. To him, that mindset is crazy. Fighting is about legacy, respect, and making history. It's not just about chasing quick paydays at the expense of people you love. Sterling and Merab have built something rare in this sport, a brotherhood that goes beyond championships and beyond fame. That is why, unless the UFC puts up truly life-changing money, it will remain a fight that never happens. Move on to another news. Islam Makhachev has built his reputation as one of the most complete fighters the lightweight division has ever seen. At 155 pounds, his wrestling looked unstoppable, his control on the ground felt like a cheat code, and his dominance left the UFC scrambling to find worthy challengers. He systematically dismantled opponents, defended his belt, and carried the torch passed down by Khabib, showing the world just how powerful Dagestani grappling could be. For years it seemed like nobody at lightweight had the tools to truly test him. But at UFC 322, everything changes. Islam is making the move to welterweight, stepping up to 170 pounds to challenge JDM for the title. This isn't just about fighting another contender, it's about facing a completely new challenge in a division filled with naturally bigger, stronger, and harder-hitting fighters. Moving up in weight brings risks that even the best champions struggle to manage. Weight cutting is always brutal, but when you move in the opposite direction, you suddenly lose the advantages you once relied on. At lightweight, Islam was the bigger, stronger man. At welterweight, he's the one walking into the cage against opponents who have lived and thrived at that size their entire careers. This means Islam will be giving up reach, power, and possibly some of that dominant wrestling edge that defined his reign. The extra muscle mass may help in some areas, but it also brings questions. Will his cardio hold up? Will the added size slow down his speed and transitions on the ground? These are the uncertainties that hang over this fight, and they're exactly why the MMA world is buzzing. Photos of Islam ahead of UFC 322 show that he's clearly bulked up for this matchup. His frame looks thicker, his shoulders look wider, and on the surface he appears ready for war at 170. But looking bigger in pictures is very different from absorbing the shots of elite welterweights inside the octagon. JDM in particular is one of the most dangerous strikers in the division. His boxing is clean, crisp, and backed with serious finishing power. He's a fighter who thrives in exchanges, and unlike many of Islam's past opponents, he won't be easy to take down and hold. This matchup isn't just intriguing because of the styles, but because of the history behind moves like this. Many legendary champions have tried to move up in weight and discovered that what made them dominant in one division doesn't always translate against naturally larger opponents. Anderson Silva, Conor, and even fighters like BJ Penn all faced that same reality. Some managed to pull off historic wins, while others found themselves overwhelmed by size and strength differences they couldn't overcome. For Islam, this is more than just a fight, it's a chance to cement his legacy as not only the king of lightweight but as a true two-division force. If he defeats JDM, his name joins the conversation with the greatest fighters in history, but if he falls short, it could expose the limits of his dominance and remind the MMA world just how unforgiving this sport can be when you step outside of your comfort zone. Move on to another news. Conor has just received a massive offer that could mark one of the most historic comebacks in UFC history. The Irish superstar has been called out once again by none other than Nate Diaz, who wants to settle their legendary rivalry with a third fight, this time at the White House. For fans of MMA, this is a storyline that has been years in the making, and it could finally be coming full circle. The rivalry between Conor and Diaz began back in March 2016 at UFC 196. On that night in Las Vegas, Diaz stunned the world by weathering Conor's early storm and securing a submission victory via rear naked choke. The upset shook the entire MMA landscape and instantly created one of the sport's most unforgettable moments, but the feud didn't end there. Just 5 months later in August, the two warriors clashed again at UFC 202 in one of the greatest fights the Octagon has ever seen. This time Conor edged out a hard-fought majority decision, evening the score at 1 apiece. Since then, fans have been clamoring for a trilogy to settle the rivalry once and for all. The tension, the back-and-forth trash talk, and the sheer intensity of their two previous encounters have cemented this matchup as one of the most anticipated in UFC history. Yet, for nearly a decade, that third fight has remained just out of reach. Nate Diaz, now 40 years old, has had a mixed run since those iconic clashes. He picked up notable victories against Anthony Pettis and Tony Ferguson, but fell short against Jorge Masvidal and Leon Edwards. His most recent fight was against Ferguson at UFC 279 in September 2022, where he scored a submission win before stepping away from the promotion. But now Diaz has admitted he's more than willing to step back into the cage if it means completing the trilogy with Conor, and he wants it to happen at the UFC's highly anticipated White House event in 2026. Speaking to Clocked and Loaded, Diaz said, "Yeah, for sure I want that fight. We will see what happens, time will tell." The timing couldn't be more fitting. UFC CEO Dana White has already confirmed that the White House event in Washington, D.C. is officially locked in for July 4th, 2026. He posted a video on social media saying, "It was a great day. I'm about to take off here from Washington, D.C. The White House fight is on. I'll have more details in the next couple weeks. We got it done today." This announcement sent shockwaves across the combat sports world as the UFC prepares for what could be its most iconic venue ever. Conor, now 37, has not fought since July 2021 at UFC 264, where he suffered a brutal TKO loss to Dustin Poirier after breaking his leg in the opening round. That fight was supposed to be his comeback after falling short against Poirier earlier at UFC 257, but the injury left him sidelined for years. Earlier this year, fans noticed that Conor's name was even removed from the UFC's official roster page, sparking rumors of retirement, yet his record still stands at 22-6, and his star power remains unmatched in the sport. Meanwhile, Diaz enters the conversation with a record of 22-13, and although his career has had its ups and downs, his name is still synonymous with toughness, durability, and big fights. A trilogy bout between him and Conor at the White House would not only be historic but could also serve as the perfect conclusion to one of the most intense rivalries the UFC has ever seen. Move on to another news. American mixed martial artist Dillon Danis has made headlines once again after boldly declaring that he is ready to face former UFC lightweight champion Islam and current middleweight powerhouse Khamzat. In classic Danis fashion, the statement was delivered with full confidence and no hesitation. "I'm a different level. I'd kill Islam, Khamzat, whoever. I've been saying this since the beginning. Masvidal, Diaz, they can all get it," he said. That kind of talk is exactly what fans have come to expect from Danis, a fighter who thrives on stirring the pot and putting his name alongside the biggest stars in combat sports. Danis is fresh off a return to competition under MMA rules when he took on Warren Spencer at Misfits Boxing 22 in Manchester. Despite the event being primarily known for its crossover boxing bouts, Danis stepped into the cage to remind the world of his grappling roots. He wasted no time in the fight, securing a submission victory in the very first round. With that win, he not only remained undefeated but also claimed the Misfits light heavyweight title, further adding to his reputation as a polarizing yet undeniably dangerous competitor. Now holding a record of 3 wins and 0 losses, Danis is beginning to frame himself as a threat to the biggest names in MMA. Whether or not he ever shares the octagon with fighters like Islam or Khamzat remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: Danis knows how to keep himself in the spotlight. His willingness to call out the toughest challenges in the sport keeps fans talking, whether they believe in his skills or doubt his words. For Danis, it's all about building the hype, keeping his undefeated streak alive, and proving that he belongs among the elite names he continues to challenge. Move on to another news. Conor and Nate Diaz could finally be set to complete one of the most iconic trilogies in UFC history, and the stage could not be any bigger. The rivalry that started nearly a decade ago may reach its conclusion at the White House UFC Card, a historic event scheduled for July 4, 2026, as part of America's 250th Independence Day celebrations. The UFC has confirmed that the South Lawn of the White House will serve as the venue, making this card one of the most unique and groundbreaking events the sport has ever seen. Nate Diaz has already made it clear that he wants the fight. In a recent interview with Clocked and Loaded, he didn't hesitate to call for the trilogy against Conor. His words carried the weight of unfinished business. "Wouldn't you rather see Nate Diaz versus Conor at the White House? That's the fight I'd rather see," he said. For fans who have followed this rivalry since 2016, this is the matchup that feels destined to happen. Diaz has been looking to get back into action for some time, but finding the right opponent has been a challenge. Now with the White House event set in stone, the timing feels perfect. Conor, meanwhile, hasn't fought since July 2021, when his rematch with Dustin Poirier ended in disaster after he suffered a broken leg. That injury kept him sidelined for years, sparking questions about whether he would ever return to the octagon. But recently, Conor signaled his comeback by re-entering the UFC's anti-doping program, a requirement for any fighter planning to step back into competition. Despite being absent from the cage, his star power has not faded. If anything, his name attached to the White House card only adds to the sense that this will be a historic night. Their rivalry is already etched into UFC lore. At UFC 196, Nate Diaz shocked the world by surviving Conor's early flurry and submitting him with a rear naked choke. Just months later, at UFC 202, the rematch delivered one of the greatest fights in MMA history. Conor came back with a vengeance, showing improved patience and discipline, and walked away with a hard-fought majority decision. That left the score tied at 1 apiece, with the trilogy hanging over both men's careers ever since. Former champion Bisping has voiced his support for this fight as the main event at the White House. He believes that the energy, the history, and the personalities involved make it the perfect headliner for a card of this magnitude, and he's not alone. Fans have been calling for this trilogy for years, and the idea of it happening on such a grand stage only makes the anticipation even stronger. Nate enters this potential fight with a record of 22-13, while Conor stands at 22-3. Both men have had ups and downs in their careers, but their rivalry has remained one of the most compelling stories in combat sports. Now with the UFC confirming the White House card and both fighters signaling their interest, the world may finally get the trilogy that has been nearly 10 years in the making.